So, good morning, everybody. My name is Mariusz Banach, and I'm a senior offensive expert back in ING Hubs Poland. A little bit about me. So, I am an ex-malware analyst and ex-malware anti-malware developer, and now I'm turning red because I have been inclined towards offensive security operations for the better part of 6 or 8 years. Some of you may recognize me from my researches and a open source technology release on my GitHub. And without any further ado, let us quickly jump to the topics that we'll be dealing with today. So I would like to give you some insight into the currently used tactics employed by the modern threat actors, as well as red teams that try to emulate as closely as they have capabilities for, just to simulate the currently posed threats worldwide. So we'll be giving a few brushes on the phishing tricks that still work for the 2022, as well as the initial access. And we're going to be diving towards the idea of containerization, mark of the web flags, as well as the HTML smuggling, which still holds us back, even though it has been invented maybe 5 years ago. And then we'll wrap up with some of the ideas for the evasion for the red teams, as well as what we observe from the threat actors. So let's start with the phishing, with the notion for more viable ideas for phishing. So first of all, currently threat actors are more inclined towards establishing well-built multi-step plausible pretexts with their victims. So the legacy approach of just firing away a single email and then hoping for the victim to just click on that email or just open up that attachment is not working any longer, and we can observe that by going through the threat actors analyzed by the threat intelligence groups, such as Google Tax One, which has recently described the recent attacks towards our Polish security and military personnel, where they have been engaged into multi-step exchanges with emails that eventually ended up with delivering a malicious URL or the attachment. So the attachments are a no-go during the 2022 era because of the fact that they are so heavily scrutinized by the platforms such as Microsoft Defender for Office 365 or the email scanning security, email scanning solutions. So what are the other options? Since we know that the companies that are really focused towards hardening their security posture would be employing the robust solutions such as MDO for the Office 365, the attackers need to change their tactics and just attack from this side of the barricade. So they would instead engage us, employees, on the third-party platforms such as LinkedIn. So so if you are performing phishing awareness training in your companies, or if you are talking with your parents and with your aunts and friends, then just try to raise the sensitiveness against the clicking on the email on the links delivered in the communication chats such as LinkedIn itself. It's so common for the attackers to abuse that approach, and then also abusing the legitimate communication channels such as CV recruitation, communication forms that we have on our employees or on our company websites is going to be a viable approach as well for the attackers. So the threat actors, as well as red teams, are now more focused towards phishing to persist instead of phishing to access. It used to be a common approach to just deliver the malicious file, for instance, executable to the victim, and then hope and then pray for that victim to just click on that file, and then wait for the callback to check into our attacker's server. Now, in the aggressively configured EDRs era, this no longer holds true because EDRs are very good at correlating events revolving around file create, file write, and then execution. So EDRs will be very sensitive about checking that, for instance, there was a Microsoft Word process which created the file and then and then has written to that file, and then afterwards has executed that file. And this chain of events is going to correlate into a nice and very robust incident, which is going to obviously disrupt the attacker's infection chain. Instead, attackers may now stick towards dropping a DLLs. So for instance, there is this directory in local app data for the Teams. It's only present for the enterprise installations of Teams, and the attackers may be able to drop the version DLL to this directory, and then hope for the Teams to restart. And as soon as the Teams restarts, it's going to check out for the locally present DLL of that name. Locally, by the locally, I mean in that very directory, and then the Teams itself, Microsoft signed binary, is going to load the attacker-controlled DLL within the process memory within its memory space. And in that manner, we've got Microsoft signed binary, which loads unsigned module, and this is not going to be scrutinized by the EDRs because of the performance reasons. Each process loads more than 50, 60 different modules, DLLs, and even Microsoft on its pages recommends against applying DLL's verification because of that reason. Then for the phishing, one last idea for the phishing. So when initial access will be gone, and this is going to happen sometime from now, as we can see on the Mac OS world, when the classic initial access, starting off the macros and so on, is not longer valid one, then the attackers will be left with the phishing. And the phishing now can be taken to the next level by applying automation happening just right post stealing one's credentials. So we can use ideas like Murena and Puppeteer, developed by the Anti-Snatcher, who is a developer of the Beef framework, and that would use the browser automation ideas for immediately performing some actions, such as backdooring your Azure DevOps environments. Just consider the threat for your developer, clicking on the link, then authenticating to the official Rogue site, and that site, in a glimpse of an eye, would then immediately generate or just even plant the attacker-controlled SSH key towards the Azure DevOps platform, and that would happen even in a second before attacker actually gains access to the credentials, because the phishing platform made these actions automatically. So to protect, or maybe not primarily protect, but at least to just increase the bar for the attackers, we would need to strive towards enforcing MFA wherever is possible on each of our Office 365 services, as well as thinking about considering deployment of Microsoft Defender for Office 365, which is very, very robust against, which is very robust with disrupting phishing attempts. And this correlates very closely to our experiences from the field. And then also, if you are using Azure AD, then be sure to check out conditional access policies, which would mandate authentication solely from the VPN sites or from the Office estate. So now for the initial access. Before I begin delving into all the myriad and sea of the threats, I need to be honest with you. I think, and the initial access is like my very strong suit. I'm very interested towards it, and I specialize in that stage. And I think it is my opinion, it's my speculation that initial access is not going to be possible, viable in the Windows world in a few years from now, and we can compare our current Windows posture to what we have in the macOS, where in the macOS, for instance, it is not possible to deliver the shortcut to applications, some sort of, or even the Microsoft Office macros. Even though we can deliver macros to the Office to the macOS platform, then there would be this very heavily constrained sandboxing applied on the entire Office installation, which would dramatically contain the attacker. And I'm speaking out of my own experiences when I have been struggling really hard to jump out of the of that kind of a condition. So the recommendations for 2002: buy LNK, buy CPL. We're going to dissect this format in a little bit. Then hold on Office macros, hold on ISOs, and sell. So if you are teamers, and if you base your tactics on the exe or HTAs, HTML applications, VBS scripts, and so on, then just change your tactics because they are not so much more viable for the 2022. With that being said, Windows script host, so the HTAs, XSLs, VB scripts, and so on, they are very well detected by everything that is able to detect anything. So we shouldn't be really worried about these formats from the defender's perspective, and from the offensive side, don't just use this format because this doesn't really emulate the current threats. So when it comes to emulating current threats, what we are seeing right now more commonly would be the abuse of the CPL files and XLL files, which are just variations on the DLL. So the control panel applet CPL file has this very convenient trait of being double clickable. In other words, we can deliver the CPL file, which is technically a DLL. So this is a dynamic library, and then have our employee, our victim, to just double click on the file and then have and then get infected. This holds true for the XLL as well, and there are a bunch of other formats that technically are still DLLs. And what does this mean for us is that if there is a DLL file, then that file has to be handled by other runtimes. So for instance, CPL files will get loaded by the run DLL32, which is Microsoft signed binary, and for instance, Excel, of course, is going to be loaded by Excel, which means that on our process tree, we won't be seeing the evil.cpl, but instead we'll be seeing the run.dll and maybe the entire convoluted hierarchy of parents and child processes. And this is actually quite intimidating at first, maybe, but we have proven several times that multiple security vendors are prone to being unable to sense threats within these formats, such as CPLs and XLLs, because of the fact that even Microsoft recommends against, or maybe not against, but just not recommends to heavily scan DLL modules because of the performance impact that this is going to entail. Therefore, we've seen aggressively configured products, such as CrowdStrike, being completely blind to CPL files. You can have Meterpreter within the CPL file, which is like threat detected by everybody out in the world, and you can put it into the CPL file, then deliver it to the very heavily protected bank, and that bank won't notice because of the fact that CrowdStrike is just unable to comprehend CPLs. And this is really intimidating. Therefore, we need to work with our detection engineers, with our threat intelligence teams, towards containing this kind of formats. And then there is this LNK. And the LNK is a threat known for like 20 years or more. The world has first shaken from the LNK threat during the Stuxnet in 2008, when the Stuxnet exploited the vulnerability within the Explorer by having the Explorer automatically parse LNK and then bam, then exploit just executed. Now, the attackers are not so sophisticated, don't have this kind of capabilities, but instead they would prey on the very trivial, naive ideas like putting convoluted PowerShell or CMD or VBS script into the LNK and then hoping for the best. So the attackers would typically put the LNK into some kind of container, such as ISO, because we cannot download LNKs directly from the web browser. Chrome is going to change the extension from LNK to download it. Therefore, it's not possible to deliver it this way. And then the attackers would deliver the ISO or any other container, such as zip, towards our employees, and then have them click on that LNK. LNK can then drop, for instance, the DLL and then load the decoy document complementing the pretext. So That's one thing to bear in mind. We'll get back to the LNK shortly. So HTML as an attachment can also contain quite nasty idea for HTML smuggling. I'll get back to this later. But still, but just for this slide, do remember that receiving HTMLs in attachments is a red flag from the detection perspective. Then malicious documents and Office macros. Microsoft promised us to block the macros, then he rolled back on that promise, then he promised us again, and now we've got the world when the macros are actually blocked. And this is very, very convenient, but before we explore that further, attackers have many ways to weaponize the macros from the VBA perspective. Three most viable ideas will be simplicity at its best, so file droppers, .NET 2.js, and XSL, which weaponize the in-memory execution of .NET assemblies, which is very, very effective, deadly effective against even aggressively configured solutions such as Defender. So actually, if you have Microsoft Office 365 starting with version 2202, you'll notice that whenever you download the macro-enabled document from the internet, you won't be able to enable macros because Microsoft has told you not to do so. And this is based on the mark of the web flag, which is the taint flag marked on the file that indicates that this file comes from the untrusted origin, such as internet or the USB flash drive. And this is what we see when we attempt to run macros. This is what we'll be seeing after enabling macros. So VB runtime won't get enabled unless we disable that mark of the web flag. And I'll get back to this in a little bit. Other than that, if you have the mechanics or engineers or designers in your company, then you need to model the notion for attackers to deploy, to deliver you malicious diagrams, malicious projects, because you then expect to have Visio and Microsoft projects highly deployed across your estate. And you need to know that Visio project PowerPoint access can also entail VBA macros. Therefore, we should be concerning them as a dangerous file formats as well. And as you can see, there are plenty of other solutions that are not Microsoft owned that do contain VBA runtime, such as CAD systems, SCADA systems, others such as oscilloscope and so on. And this observation increases the threat that we are facing coming from the VBA macros, especially if you are in an engineering and industrial sector of the business. So now let's get back to this mark of the web. Microsoft decided that whenever there is a mark of the web flag on the file, we will be blocking macros. And we've noticed quite recently that this also holds true for the documents executed from the removable drive. So if I'm gonna get the macro-enabled document and then put it into the ISO and then mount that ISO, Microsoft Office is going to block that ISO as well. We've been convinced that the ISO might have been the valid bypass for the mark of the web flag, but after Microsoft seeing the security researchers' reports and concerns, they had enhanced their logic, and now they are sensing that the file comes from the removable drive, and then they will block that file as well. So attackers are changing tactics towards plain old LNKs, and then now they are looking for any other more exotic file formats, such as maybe VIMs or CABs. So the idea is to put the file into the container which doesn't propagate the mark of the web flag into that inner file, so that we will be able to execute macro-enabled document from the container after having that container opened somehow. If you have 7-zip installed across your company, then you'll be facing with the possibility to open up multitude of different file formats and archives. So even the Windows image format is going to be dangerous for you in your estate, as long as you have the very versatile and capable archiver installed across your company. Because all the attacker prays for is to have his victim double-click on the archive, whether this is tar darball, or this is Windows image, and then have that victim subsequently open up the malicious file. So now the shortcut to LNK, attackers can bundle their files into the LNK, into the zip archive, then append that zip archive to the LNK, which makes the invalid, corrupted kind of a contract for how LNK should look like. And then they would use this very clever idea for PowerShell. PowerShell is going to find itself, find the LNK, extract the zip archive to temporary directory, decompress zip archive within the temporary directory, and then open up the document, Office document. And on that, and in that infection chain, we'll be having Office macro-enabled Office document without having mark of the web flag. Someone can argue that, well, of the ground of running PowerShell within the LNK, it's not so beneficial to run to evade mark of the web. This is perfectly valid argument, but yet we've seen this kind of approaches to get the document opened. Also, the attackers are now researching ideas for polyglots. So we can, for instance, append HTML code to the LNK, and then have that LNK opened with the MSHTA runtime. So the LNK can be HTA at the same time. Moreover, LNK can be PDF at the same time, ISO at the same time, zip at the same time, and so on. So LNK can open up itself without changing a single bit, and then mount the LNK as the ISO, just with a little bit of extension changing maybe. But this is very easy to detect for. Just look for the CMD and PowerShell and the very well-known execution flags, such as Windows hidden, something like that. Attackers, well, these are going to be quite weak spots for the attackers. Multitude of different weaponization ideas for LNKs. We can drop files. We can upload. We can abuse the idea for polyglots. We can abuse the URI schemes. So, for instance, there is this very nasty URI scheme installed by default by the Microsoft Office suite, which, when clicked, and this can be delivered in the email as well, when clicked is going to automatically download the Microsoft Office document from the internet and then open it up in the Excel or anything like that. So attacker can merely send us this very nasty, weirdly looking URI, or even put it into the LNK, and then hope for the victim to double click on that LNK, which would then entail the downloading and execution part initiated by the Microsoft Office itself. Now HTML smuggling. Regardless of how robust and expensive and aggressively configured proxy you might have in your perimeter, that is going to be evaded because attackers can now use, and we know this technique for more than 4 or 5 years. They can use cleverly the HTML5 and JavaScript and then have the file delivered to the victim without asking him for a consent. We've seen this multiple times when we browse to the web pages, which don't ask us for permission, they just deliver us the file gets downloaded, and then it reaches our hard drive. So there's no way that Palo Alto, Zscaler, or any other proxy can do anything about it, because attackers can so heavily obfuscate HTML and JavaScript that the proxies won't even notice. So this is absolutely deadly and effective idea that we abuse in every red team we conduct, because then we don't need to worry about proxies such as Palo Alto. We just won't notice. And you can deliver any kind of file that you want, executable, DLL, anything like that, because there is not going to be response network-wise, at least from the network perspective. So there we have it. It's just a little bit about 76 different file formats that we need to be concerned about. And if you are detection engineers, if you are cyber threat intelligence, then I don't want to be in your shoes. I think that this is so easier to simulate threats instead of defending against them, I think. So as you can see, multitude of different file formats. They can come with different shapes and different variants. And if you can come up with a fancy email attachments file type policy or the proxy file type policy, you might increase the amount of work that, for the attacker. You might increase your chances to disrupt the attacks. At least this is something that we can do. And yeah. Now for the evasion in depth. So from the attacker's perspective, every step of the kill chain entails its unique challenges, and each challenge has to be modeled from the offensive perspective with a bunch of different evasions. So, each click, each activity, each interaction, each system that the victim might have needs to be anticipated by the attacker, which would be able, after doing proper OSINT maybe and other triages. Attackers can evade the simple and naive rules. You might be having deployed a rule that blocks access to websites that are signed by Let's Encrypt certificates, because we know that attackers are so fond of using Let's Encrypt certificates. Therefore, we might be thinking that, hey, let's block every website in the world that's being signed by Let's Encrypt, and then we'll block some of the attackers. But this only towards the lesser sophisticated ones, because of the fact that attackers can now upload their malicious weaponry to the Azure storage services or the S3 buckets, and then they would benefit from having very well-trusted domains such as Windows.net or maybe Azure Edge, and having perfectly valid and very nicely reputed certificate as well. So attackers can also abuse serverless services to aggress their communication. This is something I'm going to get back in a minute. Sorry. Then for the installation. So if you're red teamers, don't use Cobalt Strike, because it's used to fine-tune EDRs and antiviruses. And if you're really keen into using it, then just beware of investing multiple ton of hours for the R&D towards getting that Cobalt Strike lesser detectable. Instead, you might have better chances writing your own in-house malware. It doesn't have to be very much sophisticated. You only need to have very basic commands to just upload, download, execute assembly, something like that. And if you don't have the capacity or the talent pool, you might also try to use some of the open source C2 frameworks, such as Sliver, Mythic, Porsche C2, maybe even Havoc. I advise you against using Broad Rattle, because we don't trust the developer and we don't trust the product, and this has been used by the threat actors lately. So the executables are a no-go for the heavily monitored environments like the ones that we operate in, because of the fact that the defender can be instrumented with the attack surface reduction rules that tells, hey, this executable has been seen worldwide only on 2 endpoints. And it so comes that these 2 endpoints belong to your network. Therefore, this means that this virus, this file, is not so prevalent, hasn't been seen worldwide, therefore I'm not trusting it, I'll block it right on the spot. So red teamers, regardless of how advanced your malware development capabilities are, how nasty evasion you have developed, Defender isn't impressed, because it will block exes regardless of their contents, based on their lesser reputation. And we evade that using DLLs, because Microsoft isn't applying rigid scanning on the DLLs because of the performance impact that would entail as well. Then the wall of text, I won't be reading this. At the end slide, you'll have the URL to this slide deck, so don't worry about it. But just a few main ideas. If you are developing your own in-house offensive tooling, then consider staying in process. Don't remote process inject, because this is very hard to do it properly, especially if you don't have all the tricks, all the cutting-edge tricks. Beware that very nice detection ideas that the EDRs entail are looking for the set of DLLs loaded within the process that would immediately indicate that there is Cobalt Strike running in. So, for instance, there is no process within the Windows that has WinHTTP and CredUI loaded at the same time, and only Cobalt Strike beacons have this kind of trait. Therefore, you need to be aware of it, or maybe change your seed to use something else. Parent pit spoofing is a very nice idea. It works very good even today. And also apply heavily time delaying before you allocate something, before you write process memory or you write your shellcode, and then before you execute. You need to insert the heavy, the very long delays among the subsequent stages just to time out the emulation and then just time out the cyclic buffer that the EDR maintains in memory. This is the evasion for EDRs by their design that we abuse heavily. Then also don't patch AMSI, don't patch ETW because this is also detected. Instead refer to the patchless idea for hardware breakpoints. Then also if you can find such a code sample or then just write it yourself, unlink your fishy modules when you're attempting to sleep your beacon, so just hide them from the PEP module list, and then execute direct syscalls, and call stack spoofing. I know this might sound like a lot, but this is what it takes to evade modern EDRs these days. If you're lucky, you may come across the environment which will be helping you as much as possible to evade the antivirus deployed there. So this is, for instance, McAfee that's deployed in a very highly secure environment, and this McAfee is helpful enough to tell us about every process that it excludes from its scanning, so we can see in the logs readable by every user in the Windows that, hey, this con host, I won't scan it, so you can just spawn your capabilities into con host, and then I won't complain. For the command and control, egress over the serverless services such as AWS Lambda, Cloudflare Workers, DigitalOcean apps, maybe Azure Functions, CDNs such as Azure CDN and StackPath, because in that way, Blue Team is not going to be able to block entire block of the Azure website, and yes. Also, if you can use exotic channels for your communications such as Teams, GitHub, OneDrive, and so on. Now, I'm one slide before the summary, so just wrapping up this real quick. If you're about to exfiltrate something from during your operation, consider exfiltrating to the OneDrive, waiting for the OneDrive client to sync your exfiltrated files automatically, and then just patiently wait with your coffee in your hub to have the client sync that file, that very big archive that you wanted to exfiltrate from the compromised estate, and then authenticate to the OneDrive from the web browser, and then just benignly download that archive. So for instance, we have exfiltrated 1 gig's worth of a Teams archive, communication, chats, files downloaded, and so on. And we just simply copied it to the that archive to the OneDrive sync directory, waited, and then we had to steal the Azure primary refresh token, which is the JW token used that we can use to evade MFA, evade conditional access within the Azure, and then we authenticated back to the web browser and then downloaded our big exfiltration archive. So, the summary. First of all, work closely with your cyber threat intelligence folks, as well as your detection engineers. They need to be in the forefront of the most recent threats, file formats, and tricks, because this is the best strategy that you might have towards getting prepared for the current threats. Let these teams collaborate and cooperate. Check. Do your in-house audit yourself. Ask your folks around if they feel that they collaborate with each other. Maybe there is some obstacles, technical maybe obstacles for receiving the input from the threat intelligence team to the detection engineering team. Then detection engineers, they don't have to be they don't have to have cutting edge knowledge for the threats. This is the task for the threat intelligence team. They need to engineer use cases and the threat hunting queries. This is where they excel at. And detection engineers don't detect tools, detect techniques. So don't you dare, I'm obviously joking, but don't you dare checking on the plain volatile file names, such as Mimikatz or Who Am I, you know that attackers can change the names of the files that they are using. They can recompile the tools and then change command line parameters. So sensing for the /Kerberos in command line isn't going to give you a robust detection rule. Yeah, and one small sentence about the ING Hubs Poland. So if you're curious about joining the ranks of red team of red team engagements that we deliver, come and join us at ING Hubs Poland. There's a kiosk down there in the, I think, the level 2. We are doing the IT security services for the worldwide, for the entire bank in the world, and there are very cool exercises because of the fact that the environment that we operate is so heavily restricted. And also, one last word for me. If you want me to help your team, I can offer some of the training as well as tooling services. I am delivering the initial access as well as moderate team tactics training, as well as I privately distribute only to vetted teams my initial access framework that contains all of the fancy stuff, bells and whistles that you can imagine. So if you're interested, come and contact me. And are there any questions?
All right, thank you. Bravo.
Thank you.
That was a free ride, correct? A lot of information in a quite short amount of time. I do not see any questions on the Slido platform. Any questions from the audience?